Hey everyone, I'm here to talk about the Professor. I've been playing quite a few games with him, and I think with that I am able to talk a bit more about the Professor, an ID whom I previously was not acquainted with at all. So for those of you who haven't really seen or tried the Professor out, I can maybe give you some tips on how to play or how to deal with him. Now, there's a reason why the Professor isn't very competitive besides the fact that he cannot really make use of his infinite influence on programs just yet with the current card pool. One reason that he's so weak is because he has only one influence to spend on out of faction cards that are not programs, which means that he cannot use some of the most powerful cards in the game. Yep, I'm talking about you, Akamatsu. Once you see the ID Professor on the table as the corp, you know for sure that you don't have to worry about things like Akamatsu and Inside Job. Those cards can be completely ruled out from the runner deck. Secondly, the very reason why you play Professor is because you're using lots of out-of-faction programs. So, as the corp, when you see the Professor is your opponent runner, you have to expect that they are including utility programs such as Sneak Door Beta and Medium, which have a very high impact if the runner uses it upon you as an ambush. So usually these are ambushes, but the surprise factor will be dumbed down once they know that and expect this coming from you. And they will expect it because if you are not running these programs, you shouldn't be playing Professor. So all in all, when you see a Professor deck, you could be surprised, but you won't necessarily be shocked when you actually get down to playing a game, because you more or less know what is in the deck and what can never appear in the deck. Alright, there are two parts to building a Professor deck, including programs and including the rest of your cards. I will talk about the programs in another video. And actually, because of the current card pool is so limited, I must say that the programs are really more or less quite standard across all Professor decks. What really defines a Professor deck are the other cards, the tutors and the ways which the Professor makes money and draws cards, etc. These are the cards that we'll be talking about today. Alright, I don't think there's any need to talk about SMC and Clone Chip. Those are auto-includes in most Shaper decks anyway. Now I'll move on to card draw. Card draw is very important for the Professor. Even though he can tutor stuff, the Professor wants to see lots of tutors and lots of ways to get his programs out because he has so many of them. So it is very necessary to have strong card draw, and this is done with diesel and quality time. Sometimes you can sacrifice a couple of quality times because you'll be running Prof Contacts, the card made for the Professor. Prof Contacts is definitely a strong include. He gives you consistent card draw and free credits to go along with it. As long as you can find it and play early, Prof Contacts is always a good choice. Personally, I'm not going down that route. The reason why, I'll explain later. But instead, what I use for economy would be Magnum Opus. Magnum is very strong, and it also syncs up with a certain card that I'll explain later. It does cost 2 MU, and the Professor is very constrained on MU. However, with the versatility in manipulating programs that are on and off the table for Shapers, I find that there's not much problem with using Magnum Opus as a source of income. In fact, especially against Wayland decks, which you always have to keep on the ball with regards to the economy game, and to a certain extent NBN with the mid-seasons, having a Magnum Opus is much more preferable to using professional contacts, in my opinion. The next few cards we'll talk about are means in which to play your programs out. Because you are using lots of heavy duty programs, most likely you'll be playing things like Garrote, Morningstar, Torch, all these programs that cost so many credits to play. You will want to find some way to get them at a discount, if not for free. In other words, to cheat them onto the board. Here's one way, Personal Workshop. Personal Workshop is awesome. And, well, it's in the Shaper faction, so why not use it? The best thing about Personal Workshop is that it can be activated in the middle of a run. This is very important and should never be underestimated. The ability to manipulate your rig in the middle of a run, suiting your rig to what ice you encounter is very important, because why do you play the Professor? Because you want to have a toolbox of solutions. No matter what your opponent throws at you, you have a solution for it. And being able to install that solution mid-run is so powerful. Furthermore, it synergizes with Stimhack, which is almost always the one influence you spend on. And it also is a good use of bad pub. In fact, if you're playing against a Grindel or someone who scores lots of hostile takeovers, you want to run as frequently as possible so you can take full advantage of the bad pub by using those credits to liberate stuff off Personal Workshop. No more clicking for credits once you have Personal Workshop. The downside of Personal Workshop are quite a few. For one, Elizabeth Mills has been printed, making it very vulnerable to trashing, and you certainly don't want to trash a Personal Workshop full of hosted programs. Secondly, it's time consuming because you have to install stuff onto Personal Workshop, which takes a click. Tax, you're also very vulnerable to tax when you're running Personal Workshop. And finally, it doesn't really save you that much money. It only gives you a drip economy of essentially 1 credit per turn. It's not all that much. Alright, moving on, we have Test Run and Scavenge. Test Run allows you to, it's a very powerful card because when the corp decides to place pressure on you by installing a remote, you can easily get in by test running a Femme Fatale. It's basically like an inside job now. So, yes, you can crack open any ice and score 2 points right off the bat. These two agenda points might be just what you need to give yourself a jump start or the edge to win a game. Test Run is a very strong shaper card and should be strongly considered as a means of tutoring. Scavenge, on the other hand, is a very great card in a Professor deck simply because it fully exploits the versatility of the Professor. Being able to switch up your rig depending on what ice the corp installs, or to install certain programs such as Sneak Door Beta when Archives is at its weakest, proves to be very, very useful in games. Now, Test Run and Scavenge by themselves are powerful enough already. Now just combo them together and you get what is arguably the best thing since sliced bread. The ability to install any program in your stack or heap for free, well, after paying the 3 credits from Test Run, is ridiculous. It's ridiculously powerful. Yes, and it doesn't have to be the same program. You can Test Run a Femme Fatale, use it to crack open a server, and scavenge it at the end of your turn to get a Magnum Opus out for economy, to get a Torch out to break through those nasty toll booths, to anything. It's so powerful. It's crazy. And the only downside really to this is that you require both 3 copies of Test Run and Scavenge to be even semi-reliably pull this off, and you require both combo pieces to be in your hand before you can do it. However, with the strong card draw offered by Diesel, Prof Contacts, and Quality Time, there's not much problem really. Then we have Sahasrara, which combos quite well with Scavenge. Sahasrara allows you to install a program and reduce its cost by 2 once per turn. This essentially turns Scavenge into an upgrade. If you played Dominion before, you will have encountered this kind of upgrade cards. This is no different. It essentially allows you to upgrade any program currently on your board into one that costs up to 2 more than the current program you're about to trash, as long as it's in your heap. This is quite amazing. A Magnum Opus can suddenly become a Garrote where your opponent least expects it. A used Imp, for example, can become a Gordian Blade. It's so cool. The downside is that it costs 1 MU, which is very significant. Since it has an install cost of 2, and it gives you 2 recurring credits, you'll want to use it at least 3 times to install 3 programs and reduce the cost of each by 2 for it to be even worthwhile. And knowing that the Professor is already very constrained on memory, being forced to have to keep a Sahasrara on the board that's hogging up 1 memory is quite the issue. And it's really only viable if you are planning to install Jin early on for the extra MU. So all in all, it's a very cool combo card in my opinion, but it's not as strong as some of the other cards that are available to the Professor. Finally, there's this card that I must talk about when we are dealing with Professor decks, and that is Freelance Coding Contract. This is the reason why I play Magnum Opus over Prof Context. This is a very powerful burst economy card. It gives you as many credits as a full account siphon, and you don't need to make any successful runs. All you need is 5 programs in your hand, which is easily accomplishable with both Diesel and Quality Time. So, why play Freelance Coding Contract in a Professor deck? Wouldn't it be better for an Exile deck where you absolutely want to trash your programs? Well, think about it this way. Your Professor deck will most likely be half comprised of programs because you are spamming lots of out-of-faction programs. Otherwise, you wouldn't be playing the Professor in the first place. So, with such a high program density, it will be such a waste if you trash all these programs for nothing. Why not make your time worthwhile by including Freelance Coding Contract? It's essentially a sure gamble on steroids that doesn't require a minimum credit of 5. And even if you use Freelance for 2 or 3 programs to get 4 or 6 credits, it's already worthwhile. Not only are you throwing programs into your heap for recursion with Scavenge or Clone Chip, you're getting free money out of it. I feel that it is a very strong card in a Professor deck and really should be played more often. And because you're using Freelance Coding Contract, you want to have higher program density, so you use Magnum Opus instead of Prof Context as a source of income. It will be a bit redundant to play both, and you don't have that much deck space anyway. Furthermore, Prof Context, the draw that you get from Prof Context is not enough to fuel Freelance Coding Contract. Ideally, you want to chain Quality Times into Diesels to get lots of cards in your hand before Freelance Coding out. Prof Context only gives you 1 card per click. Not enough. So, with that, I basically covered most of the cards that I'm using in my current Professor deck, the current iteration of it. I think Magnum Opus and Freelance Coding Contract both provide a very strong backbone, economic backbone for my Professor deck, with which I can actually viably play out programs such as Femme Fatales and Torches from my hand, paying the install costs. It's not the most efficient way to do it, but it gives me the option, which is very valuable. All that while accelerating my card draw so I can get more clone chips and more forms of recursion and tutoring, which is so valuable for the Professor. I think that's all I'm planning to cover for this half of my Professor walkthrough. I hope you found it useful. If you have any more insights to share, or any corrections you want to make to my guide, please do leave a comment below. Thanks for watching. I'll see you around.